Yo, what is up guys, Ghost here, welcome back to the channel, and today we have a lot of new Stormgate information to go over. Recently there was an AMA and Ask Me Anything over on the Stormgate subreddit, and a lot of the developers chimed in there on many of the hot topics that the community wanted to ask questions on, so everything from monetization to the funding of the game, co-op, heroes, 1 versus 1, 3 versus 3, you name it, it was pretty much tackled in this AMA. So in this video, I wanted to go over the most pertinent questions, the most interesting ones, but as always, I will leave a link to the whole thing down below if you want to go and read through all of the 200 plus questions and answers over there. As always, if you guys do enjoy the content here on the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I will do my best to keep you guys up to date with Stormgate as the game does ramp up to its eventual 1.0 release. Thank you, as always, for the ongoing support. Alright, without further ado, let's just jump in here with the first question coming in from SoftVoice123, and he asks, will you add chat channels to make the game more social like we had over 2 decades ago in Diablo 2, Warcraft 3 and StarCraft? Bit of a jab there at how far the social side of, well, not just Stormgate, but also Blizzard games, I feel, have fallen. And this was the answer. So this comes in from Chris Fugate, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, the systems designer, and he says, we are hashing out some details on this one, but allowing players to more easily chat with each other within the client and feel as though there's some life in the Stormgate menu screens is high up on our list. It's too lonely in there. And I completely agree. I remember playing Brood War all the way back in the 90s when I first got the internet. I think that was the first online game that I ever played, in fact. And it was such a great experience being put into the GBR1 channel for me because, you know, back then I lived in the UK, so you would be put into your regional channel, and then you could create and join any channel that you wanted to. Now, these days, of course, Discord does exist, but I don't think that should necessarily be used as an excuse not to put similar functionality directly in the game client. After all, not everybody uses Discord, not everybody wants to have Discord open all the time on a second monitor either, and it's just a nice place to hang out between games when you're in the client. At the end of the day, there isn't really anything else to do there within the client, so you may as well be in a chat channel. Next question here is a spicy one. JD Ban says, how worried should we be about Frostgiant running out of money before 1.0? So Tim Morton answers this one and he says, for me, the real question isn't whether Frostgiant can release a 1.0 version of Stormgate. Calling a game 1.0 is just a decision that a developer makes, but what we achieve for that release. The scope of 1.0 is uncertain on every game project, even inside big publishers, but we've made an effort to be more transparent about how much we've raised, the size of our team, and what we hope to deliver. For better or worse, we're ambitious in terms of number of game modes, our desire to enhance social aspects, which are works in progress, and our intention to provide great tools for user content. Lots of work ahead here. We're very fortunate to have investors who support our vision, and at the same time, we're operating on a small fraction of the budget that a major publisher would allocate to build a project like this. The more funding we get, the more we can do. I would like to raise more funding ahead of our 1.0 release, but we have a scalable plan, and I'm excited about the vision we're working towards. So that's a very good point there. You can release the game at any point and call it 1.0. The absolute bottom line here is how good of a product is 1.0 going to be, not will we reach a period in time when they release a 1.0. But it's good to hear that they do have a scalable plan, so it sounds like they've sort of got a plan A, B, and C. If they keep up with the amount of investment that they have right now, they can churn out this much content for the game. If they end up getting another round of investment, which hopefully they will, which will give them more time, then they're going to go and step it up a bit, and there will be more features on launch. What I hope is that however many features they do decide to have in the game at launch, they just need to be good and they need to be polished. Cutting back on features I think is okay if they don't have the money to do it. After all, if the game becomes successful, it starts gaining traction and making some money, they can add more features after the fact. But what they really don't want to do is overface themselves with too many features and then not have the time to apply that necessary polish and make it actually entertaining and the gameplay loop good and fun. Okay, next question comes in from yours truly, and I asked, are there any art overhauls planned for the Vanguard and the Celestials, similar to what's already been teased for the Infernals, and if so, are they expected to be completed before 1.0? I love what I've seen of the Infernals refresh so far. Obviously, I've made a couple of videos about this already. I'm sure you guys have already seen what they are doing with the Infernals. And Alan was kind enough to respond to this, and he says, "Hi, yes, we are looking for various opportunities to improve and polish all the factions. Currently we're focused on Infernals mostly. There's a lot of content for our awesome team to go through for 1.0, so we're not committing to exactly how many units and structures will be done by then. Ideally, we'd like to keep pushing the new revamp even after 1.0 if needed. We're committed to making our Stormgate universe as engaging and cool as possible. Often it comes down to resources and schedule, but we're going all out as we speak to hit it up." So this ties in very much with what Tim was talking about with the scalable plan. So hopefully they're going to be able to get as many of these changes to not just the Infernals, but also the Vanguard and the Celestials into the 1.0 build, but it depends on just how much runway they have, right? How much time and resources do they have to put into that, and how much of it is going to have to come post 1.0. Again, the only worry I have there is that 1.0 is going to be their only big marketing beat, their only big marketing opportunity that they have in the bank. Once that's done, that is, like, in my eyes at least, really sort of make or break time. So I sincerely hope they can get in as many changes to the game as possible for that. Next question comes in from my boy Empyrean Sky, who always keeps us updated over on Reddit with all the relevant information, and he asks, "Have you settled on 3 factions, or is a 4th still a possibility?" And Tim Campbell, the other Tim, the game director, says, "Right now we're focused entirely on completing and polishing our 3 core factions, but in the future, let's just say that anything is possible." They have hinted at a 4th faction maybe being in the works at some point before, but I would say, let's not get ahead of ourselves here, guys. There is a lot of work to be done on Stormgate before they are anywhere near even considering the possibility of adding a 4th faction to the game in my mind. Next one here comes in once again from Empyrean Sky, and he says, "What are the most interesting things about Stormgate's lore from your perspective?" So Mickey Nielsen, the narrative director, answers this one, and he says, "There's an epic backstory and mythology that we've barely touched on. The origins of our otherworldly races are steeped in rich lore that will be a true thrill to experience." And then as a sort of tie-in to that as well, somebody else here asks, "Do you guys plan on moving away from the current trajectory of the campaign story? An astronomical amount of people critiqued it harshly for being a near one-to-one ripoff of Warcraft 3. It's impossible to deny the heavy inspiration has not been well received at any point in time." And Mickey once again here says, "Definitely making changes to address this feedback." And I think this question was actually asked about 3 times by different people, so here's another answer he gave. He said, "We have some big changes that we're extremely excited about. We've listened to the feedback, plus we've had time to review and iterate on it. It's going to feel like a whole new experience." Now, I don't want to go too in-depth about what this critique is about, because I know a lot of you haven't played the campaign yet, and you're waiting until the game is more fleshed out. So by the time you play it, it sounds like the storyline and the lore may have changed drastically. All you need to know is that I agree, it is strikingly similar to the backstory in Warcraft 3, and with so many other things in Stormgate being strikingly similar to Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2 and etc., I think that didn't go down too well with the community overall, but it is good to hear that they are planning some changes there. Another tough question here. Top winner 7322 says, "What are the expectations in terms of player numbers? What actions are planned to increase the low player count?" Tim Morton took this one. He says, "My sense is that most players really want a polished 1.0 release, so the development team is primarily focused on that goal right now. It's still important to us to provide a good experience for players who are already playing, so we make an effort to provide regular improvements, but we recognize that early access won't appeal to everyone. After 1.0 launches, maintaining a higher player population will be more of a focus. We can't be sure what our player counts will be, but we're definitely working hard to create a lot of new features and content." And I really do believe that there is a player base out there for Stormgate, and the old saying of "if you build it, they will come" certainly applies. But it seems like the team at Frost Giant certainly are listening to the community now, certainly if they weren't already before, and making the right choices here, making the right decisions. Of course, the proof is in the pudding and all of that. We'll see how it goes in 1.0, but I would say I am cautiously optimistic. Next question here, and once again, this one is from my good self. And so I asked here, some have criticised the 1v1 for not having entertaining enough wow moments, the kind of thing where casters lose it and one player manages to clutch in a tense situation, often through the use of a powerful ability or superior micro. At times, it feels like due to the longer TTK, you can more easily call a fight whilst it's happening, there are fewer swings, which inevitably drags out engagements once it's become clear who has the upper hand. Are there any planned changes to make the minute-to-minute gameplay more snappy and eventful? Kevin chimed in on this one and he says this feedback resonates a lot with us, so much so that make things happen is one of my 2 pillars in terms of future development. Some things we plan to do in service of this pillar include increasing the economic pacing of the game, adjusting abilities to have more visible, instant and impactful effects, reworking creeps to be more rare, more meaningful, more pointed, and have more instantly gratifying effects, reworking specific units to improve the potential for cool plays, replacing top bar abilities that shut down harassment, and then reducing the strength of late game turtling. So specifically those last 2 points there, I think, are really good. It doesn't feel great as an attacker, even if you're doing some sort of a cheese when somebody just pops a Bob overcharge and shuts down your harassment. At the same time, it is like walking a tightrope for Frost Giant Games because they didn't want all of these big swingy moments where a bunch of banelings blow up and just kill all of your marines and one of the players loses the game because they didn't realize there were burrowed banelings or they didn't realize that there's a burrowed widow mine or whatever. And so getting rid of a lot of these top bar abilities means that players are more susceptible to things like cheese in the early game. But I've always been a proponent of cheese. As irritating and frustrating as it can be to play against, cheese means that lesser skilled players, the underdog if you will, always has a chance of taking a map off of a much more highly ranked, more skillful, more adept player. And that's, like, for me, always been one of the more interesting parts of RTS. Sometimes there is a shocker and the person who is the underdog can just come out on top and win because they're amazingly good at one specific tactic or they've evolved a strategy that just works and it catches the other player by surprise. This next question comes in from Yeldu. Are you happy with the design, both visually and mechanically, of Luminite and Therium, or could we see some changes and iterations on resources and mining in the future? So Tim Campbell says, no, they are very placeholder. The resources are largely still in their first draft state, both in terms of art and functionality, and we have big changes ahead for them. We wanted to keep them in a stable state while implementing the initial versions of the 3 factions to avoid creating a moving target and changing too many things at once. Looking ahead, we'll be updating how they look and play, and maybe even their names, sometime next year alongside the upcoming faction revamps. So again, really good news there. I think we can all agree the Luminite mines themselves don't really look that next gen or amazing. And by the way, for those of you who have maybe only played Stormgate recently, these are like the OG Luminite mines that they put in, I believe, the very first beta test, at least the first one that I played, so they haven't really changed a bit. Another one here for Tim Morton. We are moving forward as a leaner, more focused team. Can you elaborate? So I believe this is a direct quote from Tim Morton in a recent blog post, and Tim answers saying there are over 45 people working on Stormgate today, but we did have to reduce our team size over the past few months in order to keep costs down. We're deeply grateful to everyone who contributed to Stormgate and wish that we could have kept everyone together. One of the hardest parts of being an independent studio is that funding is much more limited than at big publishers. So not only have they had to go and get another round of investment, another round of funding, but they've also had to cut some people from the studio, and I think that ties into just the scope that they initially went for the game being a little bit too much. They bit off a bit more than they could chew, and now they've decided to really focus via certain areas of the game, like the reworking the factions, the 1v1 mode, the campaign. Co-op is certainly going to get a lot more love in the future, but it's almost like been put on the back burner for the time being, I think. And here's another good one that sort of ties into that. You were talking about a new round of investments. In the past, you announced how much money you raised. How much are you planning to raise this time, as there is a huge difference between $1 million and $20 million? The honest answer is, as much as we can. Our current funding round is still in progress, and we'll share more once it's concluded. We are hugely appreciative of existing investors who renewed their support, and I'm hopeful that we might even see some new investors join this round. So I don't really have any understanding of how investment rounds go, but in my mind I kind of have an image of Tim Morton walking around with his piggy bank, kind of shaking it and jostling the few cents that are left inside there, hoping to get some money from anyone and everyone who's ready to invest in the game. So we've already heard that they've gotten an investment from Bitcraft, but maybe there's also going to be more investors joining in this round and giving even more money. How much money that is in total, we really have no idea. So here is another great gameplay question. The new roadmap includes changes to game pace. Can you expand on your current thoughts about what direction the game pace should go and by how much? Do you think smaller maps or maybe faster unit movement across the board, faster economy, or maybe some other ways to change the pace? So Kevin answers this one, the lead competitive designer, and he says pace is one of the big areas we're focused on right now, and it's the target of focus for an upcoming patch. Economy-wise, we feel that mid-game and late-game pace is near where we'd like it, but could use a slight bump. On the flip side, I feel that early-game economic pacing is currently the weakest part of the 1v1 game, and we're currently experimenting with combinations of changes that shore this up. Something we're experimenting with in Team Mayhem is a blanket 20% movement speed for all units, and players have generally been enjoying that. That being said, Team Mayhem utilizes a much bigger map than traditional 1v1 maps. I think it's likely we'll either take the approach of slightly increasing movement speeds or decreasing map sizes, but not both. Another aspect of pacing is the rate at which exciting events happen. Beyond economy or movement speeds, we feel that game-changing occurrences don't happen enough currently. Things that fall into this category include harassment, units dying, or particularly compelling map objectives. We feel so strongly about this that one of our pillars for all changes leading up to 1.0 is make things happen. And again, that resonates with the comment he left on my question there as well about making things happen in the game. Buffing the movement speeds by 20% sounds incredibly interesting. I'm not in the 3v3 Team Mayhem testing crew, if you want to call it that, so I haven't had the chance to give that a try, but it sounds like they are experimenting with a lot of interesting things there behind closed doors, which may or may not seep into the 1v1 part of the game in some form or another. Okay, this next one is for you co-op lovers out there. What is the planned state of co-op for 1.0 launch? More or less we have now, but more polished, or are larger scale changes intended? And Tim says, we'll definitely ship with a fully playable and more polished co-op mode, but major revamps or new co-op content beyond what we released in our most recent patch may or may not land in time for our 1.0 launch, depending on how development goes. It's simply too early for me to be able to promise anything one way or the other, but rest assured that there are a lot of dev team members, myself included, who are passionate about co-op, and it is still a major pillar for us, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, we will still continue to release co-op bug fixes and balance changes, and will also make a number of co-op adjacent improvements that should positively impact the mode even though they are not co-op specific, such as faction revamps, performance improvements, improved chat and other social features, fully customizable hotkeys, customizable automated control groups, and improved systems for progression and matchmaking. So it sounds like they're gonna make a lot of improvements to co-op, but when it comes to actually bringing brand new heroes in there, especially heroes that don't already exist, like in the campaign, so they don't already have models in the game that they can utilize, that's going to wait a while. That's going to take some more time. They're concentrating at the moment more on 1v1 and the campaign, getting those modes up to snuff. So for any real like co-op major overhaul, I think that's going to be a bit further down the line. And the last question here comes in from Alpha NP. He says, another tough question that needs to be asked. There has been some arguably warranted constructive feedback that Stormgate's units just aren't as fun as StarCraft 2's units. What is the production team doing to add some additional units and spells that are fun to use? StarCraft 2 had some really cool units like the Colossus, Battlecruiser, Carrier, Thor, and the Void Ray. I don't think the units necessarily have to be hyper competitive. If they are simple, silly, yet hilarious, they can draw in more players if they just have the fun factor. So Tim says, I don't actually think this is a tough question. I think it's a fair critique, and I'm glad you asked it. Right now, there are too many units and abilities that can be one-to-one mapped with those in other games. Although we're never going to be able to completely break from genre staples, we can definitely do a better job of weaving in new ideas and on putting our own spin on familiar elements to keep them feeling fresh. You're going to see us push a lot in this direction as we release our faction revamps this coming year. Keep in mind, our units were built throughout our development cycle, including some from very early on that still remain in the game today. Back then, we didn't have all the tools available to us, as we were building the foundational layers of our gameplay and data editor, so we were more limited in what we could do or how we could do it. At the start, even a dot or a damage over time or an AoE effect was a new capability for our game. Over time, as we've blazed more and more of a trail, our capabilities have naturally increased, but we haven't had the development cycles to go back and revisit our factions until now. Looking ahead for the revamps, you're going to see us shake up the gameplay of each faction, adding units, changing abilities, updating core mechanics, etc. And a big part of what we're trying to accomplish is to add more exciting elements to each race, more asymmetry, and to flesh out and complete the overall faction with additional types of units to play with. So I really like the sound of that. That's very exciting. It makes a lot of sense what they say, right? They get some new tech in the game, they kind of further develop it, but then they don't really have the time to go back through all of the stuff that's previously been developed and do another pass on that. And that sounds very much like what they're starting to do now with the Infernal faction. They're then going to proceed on to the Vanguard and the Celestials. Again, how much of that is going to be done by 1.0, we don't really know yet, but I can't wait to see what they do with the Infernals. Like I say, it's not just going to be new artwork and the way the units actually look in the game, which, don't get me wrong, that's going to go a long way. They're basically just overhauling the faction in general, so we're going to be seeing like a lot of new mechanics in there, a lot of new abilities. So for sure, exciting times ahead, guys. I'm going to leave it there for this one because we're already at like 20 something minutes into the video, but as I mentioned, there are plenty more questions in the thread, so if you guys want to go and have a peruse there for yourselves, feel free to go and check it out. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching the video today. Leave me all of your comments. What do you think about the proposed changes? What do you think about Frost Giant Games' answers here to all of these questions? Subscribe to keep up to date with Stormgate and other RTS titles, and I'll see you guys in the next video.